Welcome back, everybody, to the You Ask We podcast, the show where you ask the questions, they answer them, and I'm just the guy in the middle. This week, we have an amazing guest because he is an award-winning attorney based in California. He's an expert in practices and negotiation in entertainment, media, and sports. He's represented numerous clients in those fields for contractual and IP negotiations with a focus on deal making, and his clients range from Fortune 500 corporations to entrepreneurs, advertising and production companies, studios, agencies, talent agencies, and many more. I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Jeremy Evans. How are you?
Well, well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. We'd love to have you on. So the first question on this show always comes from me, and that's what's new?
Well, thank you. And again, I appreciate you having me on. And obviously, a welcome to all of your listeners out there. So, I guess for me, just been working. Obviously, the holiday season. Just got through Thanksgiving, so had a great time with the family, and was able to relax and also reflect on the year a little bit. But everything's going well. Been busy with work and um, and all that. But everything's good. Just plugging along.
It's great to hear, and I'm happy to hear your Thanksgiving well too.
No, yeah, no, thank you. How was yours? Good.
Yeah, it was great. My mom just made all the good food, stuffing. I love stuffing. It's the best thing. I wish it was year-round food, but yeah, it was a great time overall. Yeah, so this first question comes from Kyle because I actually really like this question because the thing was a lot of people submitted questions basing it as if you were an agent, but you're actually a sports lawyer. So
Right.
he's actually curious, would you be able, like, could you describe the difference between an agent and a sports lawyer?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and frankly, I'm humbled by the fact that people took the time to ask questions. And again, I appreciate you having me on the show. So, that is such a great question because it was literally, I think, one of the first questions that I had asked when I began my practice, um, little over, I guess, 11 and a half years ago, almost 12 years ago. And which is sort of crazy just to think about in terms of how time, really does fly by, and just the importance of taking in every moment. But I think with the agent and the sports attorney issue, you know, uh, it's funny because it's a question I usually ask students when I'm teaching sports law in the different programs that I teach in, or anytime I lecture or do a guest presentation or a keynote speech or what have you, is sort of this issue of what is the difference between the two. Well, to me, you can have a sports attorney who's also an agent, but to be a lawyer, to be an attorney, it's just, the terms are used interchangeably. Sometimes you hear lawyers use the word esquire. That's a little more traditional. But I think to me, the main five differences would be, as an agent, you really have to fill out, if you're in California, for example, you go to the Secretary of State's website and you fill out the one-page form, I think maybe two-page form, and I think you pay a $35 fee. And you have to list what your qualifications are and clients you represent and that sort of thing. And then, of course, if you're working in team sports, National Basketball Association, NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, Major League Soccer, any of the big five, if you will, any sort of team sport, you're going to have to register with the union, which sometimes require a test based on the collective bargaining agreement, and you go through that process. Some of the leagues require that you have a degree or a graduate degree. For example, the NFL requires that you have a graduate degree of some kind to be an NFL agent. Certified agent, I think, is what the official title is. And early on in my practice, I tried the agency work, and I'm glad that I did because I got an understanding of it. But I realized that I was much better in the deal making space. I was much better as an advocate or a counselor when it came to negotiating deals. So letting the agent, and I would say letting, basically the agent's doing their job and saying, hey, negotiate these deals, do this. do a lot of the hand holding that you do directly with the clients, and then bring me in if you want me to help negotiate the deal, close the deal, review the deal, and bring that legal expertise. The other issue I would say, or difference between lawyers and agents, is the malpractice insurance. So generally, as a lawyer, you're getting malpractice insurance in case something goes bad. I guess on the agent side, the equivalent would be taking out a bond, which essentially is insurance against something happening. So similar. I would say the other issues are, the main two issues really come down to either what you might call the model rules or the ethical rules, or in California, the rules of professional conduct, which go directly to, for example, and this may be the biggest one, is the sort of, I guess I'm trying to think of the right terminology, but the one would be unauthorized practice of law. So as an agent, you can really be an agent in any state as long as you register, or you have some sort of, or you're going through the union players association on each of the individual sports to register. But generally, you're only going to be in one sport. Because what I've found is that when agents when they're multi-sport agents, they usually doesn't end up well. Usually it's an ethical violation or some other issue, something like that, right? And then the other issue is in-person contact. So you can imagine, as an agent, your biggest thing is to recruit clients, right? As it is with any business. But as a lawyer, there's a lot of restrictions on that. You cannot, in California, for example, you cannot have in-person contact with a prospective client without a prior personal relationship. Now, I'm sure that this rule gets broken from time to time, from what I sort of hear in the industry. But I think at the end of the day, it's hard for lawyers to be agents because of that in-person contact rule, because you would need to be doing a lot of recruiting, which in many cases requires some prior personal relationship. And you cannot use a runner or a capper, as they say, to go out and get clients, somebody who's, chasing clients for you. So, and then of course, back to the unauthorized practice of law is this issue that as an agent, you can pretty much do whatever, have whatever client, whatever state, as long as you're registered. But as an attorney, you have to have a license in that state to practice law. So to me, it's just the differences in registration. It's the differences in terms what the lawyer and the agent does. The agent is generally there to procure employment. The idea is to secure deals, secure sponsorships. Many ways you're doing sales, you're doing prospective business development. As a lawyer, you're really reviewing deals. You're bringing deals together. You're providing legal expertise to things. Now, of course, some of those things can be combined. There's often folks who go to law school that don't become licensed lawyers that are agents. And there are obviously tons of folks who go to law school that become lawyers. And there's other folks that go to law school and don't do either. But those are the main 5 differences, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, it's like I always thought the main difference between agents and lawyers was like agents are kind of the babysitters, whereas lawyers take on their clients case by case. Is that true or not at all?
Well, I would say that I don't think that's incorrect, but I would say that an agent, again, if I were to make the connection, I would say an agent is more likely to, yes, do the hand holding, have the contact with the client, putting deals together, that sort of thing. But that all being said, I think lawyers, in some sense, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to be a lawyer is, and this is what you don't really learn in law school, you don't really learn until you're in the practice, is that you're taking on your client's problems, and those problems become yours. And this is why, sadly, we did this report recently. I just finished a term as president of the California Lawyers Association, which is one of the largest bar associations in the country, if not the world. And it was a volunteer role for 2 years, but a very prestigious and honorable role that I cherished and loved doing. But one of the things that came out of that experience of the mini was that there was this report that we did with the Washington D.C. bar, and it talked about attorney suicide and how attorneys have one of the highest rates of suicide amongst sort of folks who have committed suicide. And So it's a very scary thing. And the reason why I mention this is because, first of all, health and wellness is really important in this regard. But I think it's because lawyers take on their clients' problems. And so even though you could say that the agent is more of the sales arm, more of the marketing arm, more of the deal making in the sense of bringing deals together and going out and shopping deals, that sort of thing. It's the lawyer that definitely will have to take on some of these things if something goes wrong, if there's any legal action, that sort of thing. So I don't know if I would characterize it as the babysitting, but I think that, you know, each part plays their role. Agents do their thing and lawyers do their thing. I think there's definitely some crossing of lines, and you have lawyers that often do the things that agents do and vice versa. But that would be my characterization of that.
This next question comes from Miriam. Before we get into career questions and running firm questions, what are your thoughts on the movie Jerry Maguire?
Great movie. I think it definitely shows. I think it definitely shows what the agent life is like. And I would say that in many ways, an attorney's life can be similar if you're in the sports space. I think it's very truthful as to in any career, specifically agency work, you have a choice to go out on your own, like Jerry Maguire did, obviously played by Tom Cruise, or you know, you can go with a big company or a big firm. And in many ways, it's the same for lawyers. You can go out on your own, start your own practice, or you can, you know, go with a big firm or a big company or what have you. But I think a lot of the truths in that movie that you can take away are correct. You know, in that, you know, in life you have choices. You have choices about, you know, where you're going to live, how you're going to live, who you're going to work for, and that's either, you know, for yourself or for somebody else, right? And there's not one right way. I think you can find benefits and negatives on each side, but I think the movie is truthful. I think it does a good job of describing some of the emotional nature of getting clients and losing clients and that sort of thing. I would say that on the legal side, there is competition for sure, and but I'd say it'd be different, right? So like I have not seen lawyers, you know, do, you know, massive recruiting when a client is represented by another party, and part of that's because the ethical rules. You know, you cannot, you know, speak with um, another lawyer's client, obviously without the client's permission and really the lawyer knowing, you know, about that, because you can't have contact with the represented party. Now, and of course, the whole in-person contact rule and that sort of thing. And I'm sure there's recruiting that goes along with it, but you know what I've experienced and is that there's a lot of honor in the legal profession. And this is not to say that agents, I think there's some great agents out there. The agent industry can be very lucrative, could also be very challenging, much like the legal industry. But I just say the rules are just a little bit different. So yeah, that would be my sort of highlight of the film.
Yeah, I love how you say it's so truthful because it really is. Like it was to the point where I remember like in 10th grade when I first told my dad I wanted to be a sports agent. My dad said, "Watch Jerry Maguire first, then tell me you want to be a sports agent."
Yeah, that's true. That's
It's
true.
like I did, and I still wanted to. It's like that movie was it was a great movie. It was really insightful to the way the world works. We have a few questions going into your personal work, your career. This first question is from Mikey. He asked, what sports have you found yourself to be involved with the most?
Well, and you know, Mike, thank you for that question. I think that when I first began my practice, it was mostly focused on baseball because that was the sport that I loved and you know wanted to spend more time in. That being said, I think that over time it's expanded because I'm not focusing on in my first few years of practice. I did some agency work with some baseball players, um, but I think that it's really expanded beyond that because now I'm more focused on the deal. I'm more focused on the contract and the general terms, and of course sometimes it's industry specific or sport specific. But I would say for the most part, it's you know, you have a sports contract for sponsorships. It's going to be similar across the board with maybe some changes here and there depending on the schedule of a season and what, what a player is supposed to do or not supposed to do, that sort of thing, or things that come up. But I would say that baseball personally is one of my favorite sports, but I enjoy pretty much all sports and enjoy watching them and enjoy the statistical aspect of it and the numbers and the personalities and all that and the storylines that come from it. And it's no surprise to me that Hollywood has taken this up and making many television shows out of it, and see the growth there where you have this sort of athlete as producer, and sort of creating content. Obviously, social media helps with this, but yeah, that's what I would say.
What was your favorite baseball team?
So, grew up in Los Angeles, so the Dodgers have been, my team since I was young. Really didn't, I played baseball growing up, loved it. I followed the game in general. I would say that I really became a Dodgers fan, probably when I really began to follow the team and follow baseball even more. I sort of had a re-engagement or a re-falling in love with of baseball right around graduation from high school. I had a family member and a friend that took me to a Dodger game at Chavez Ravine right after graduating from high school. And I remember it was the first time I had been to the stadium since I was about 6 years old. And when my father took me there on a work sort of outing, I didn't really remember much. I know they played the Mets. I was about 5 or 6 years old. We sat in the reserve section. Great experience. But I think coming in as an adult and really just trying to describe how beautiful and green the grass was and how vast it was and the colors of the seats and the roar of the crowd. I mean, everything was just really terrific. And I really enjoyed that experience. I really fell in love with baseball from that point, where we fell in love with it. And of course, with the Dodgers. And I just love the history with Jackie Robinson and Sandy Koufax and Hideo Nomo and Chan-Ho Park and all these great Dodger, players and the history and the culture with, Branch Rickey, and the development of the farm system. Obviously, just some terrific history there with Brooklyn and everything else. So, yeah, so that would be my favorite baseball team.
So this next question comes from Dennis. How are sports contracts structured and how long do they take to get done?
That's a good question. Every situation is different. Every contract, you generally going to start with a template, if you will, and start out with that and see kind of where that takes you in terms of what the client wants, what as a, the principles, what as a lawyer and what works and what doesn't work. But every situation is going to be different. Every client's going to be different. I think as the lawyer, your job is to really hone things in and to help your client understand what the deal is about and to help them, basically understand what their obligations are. And I think if you can do that as a lawyer, you're doing a good job. And of course, to keep your client accountable. And I think even for your client to keep the attorney accountable in the sense that it should be a mutual relationship. And I would say that in my career, most of my clients have been my friends. Most of my clients have mirrored my personality. I think that makes sense, right? Because when you do the client interview, you really should be looking for quality of people and you should be looking for people that you want to work with. And that's sort of been, my experience with all of that.
Speaking of contracts and how they're structured, this question comes from Mitch. He asks, can one negotiate guarantees for players that are injury prone? Could they do that in the contract or does that happen during somewhere else?
No, absolutely. And I think that's part of the negotiation, right? Is because what you're really looking at is you're saying, okay, let's say a player is injury prone. So what you might do is do an incentive laden contract where you put incentives in the deal that says, I'll use baseball as an example. This could work with any sport. And it works really well in baseball. And I think it works really well in football as well, particularly because the average lifespan or career span, I should say, of an NFL athlete is about 3.5 years. Whereas in baseball, you could have a 20-year career, and it's more likely you're going to have a 10, 15, or 20-year career in baseball than it is in football because of the physicality of the sport, that sort of thing. I would say that in baseball, you could say something like, oh, player hits so many home runs per year, plays in so many games per year, pitches in so many innings per year, so many strikeouts, so you can do milestones, that sort of thing. So, for example, a player like Shohei Ohtani, the talk of the town, you could say something like, all right, we know Shohei is injured with regard to pitching, won't pitch in 2024 season, but you present a deal that says, okay, we know that for this first season, he's not going to pitch, but he, potentially will pitch for 2025. So maybe you have an incentive laden deal that pays him a large base, 30, $40 million a year, but then you add money on that if he pitches so many innings, so many strikeouts, that sort of thing. So to me, I think it helps the players because it incentivizes them, but you still have that base or that guarantee. In football, it might be a little more extreme, where let's say a player signs a $260 million contract. Let's say only 100 million of it, say only, but that still is a lot of money. But I think in the athlete's mind, in terms of it's not, the comparison isn't to what, a blue collar or even a white collar worker might, use or get. The comparison is to other athletes, right? Because it's what the market will bear. And so people might complain about, oh, an athlete makes too much money, but that's also in many ways up to the fans, right? Because if they attend the games, they buy the merchandise, they pay for the television package, all that money eventually makes it back to the players and to the league. But the comparison is to other players. And so in football, you might have more extremes because of the injury prone sort of sport. People are going to have time off. Of course, this is something that's happening in baseball too. I think whether it's health and wellness and some of the development, but there's been a lot more injuries of late in baseball, particularly with pitchers and with Tommy John surgery. And on one hand, it's not that, humans have developed in the last 100 years to where maybe, they're sort of more injury prone, but maybe there's some health issues in there, training issues or development issues, or something like that. And I don't think that the data was around early on in the game where you could say, maybe players were playing injured, or maybe the health and wellness was different. There's probably a lot of data out there and a lot of scientists and doctors that can comment on this, a lot better than I can. But these are definitely tools that are used by leagues and teams when it comes to developing players and putting together contracts.
I mean, do we see this type of negotiation? Do we see it in the NBA? Because I know that's a league that's trying to cut down on time people spend injured.
I think so. The problem with the NBA is that, well, problem or benefit, however you look at it, is the NBA is structured in such a way through its collective bargaining agreement that the players in many ways tend to be a little more equal to the owners of the teams and the managers of the teams, as opposed to some of the other leagues, meaning that the NBA has always been very big on splitting the revenues. The NBA has always had, at least in recent times, has had a strong union. I would say overall the strongest union in sports is baseball. I think it's probably because baseball has been through so many strikes and stoppages compared to other sports. And of course, was really one of the first leagues to have free agency and develop free agency. And of course, baseball has been around the longest. And so I think to me, it's sort of interesting because I think the NBA, their contracts are really standardized in a lot of ways. When you talk about like a super max deal or a max deal, this would never happen in baseball, at least in the current iteration of baseball, because I think that baseball is much more. We want to have basically comparable players. We want to compare other players. We want to set a new market. So there's less restrictions in that way. And of course, this makes sense for baseball, right? Because there is no salary cap. So it would make sense to have cap salaries or cap, contracts. You have a luxury tax, but obviously teams who have more revenue in bigger markets will often go over that luxury tax. But those are some of the intricacies of the sport of the different leagues that I think that are very essential. And you can see why it's good to focus on one sport versus many sports, because there's so much competition already. But then, you should really become an expert in many ways, it's like the old Ben Franklin quote, which is often misquoted, which is jack of all trades, master of one. And it's often misquoted as saying master of none. The idea is that you need to have a general knowledge about all of sports and be good about them, but be a master at one of them.
This next question comes from Richard. He asked if you have defended athletes in court, how many cases do you deal with a year, and what would the cases normally be like?
So, Richard, thank you for the question. I'm not a litigator, so I'm never in court, thankfully. I realized that early on in my career, I wanted to be a district attorney by probably from watching Law and Order episodes on TNT, and decided that that's what I wanted to do and thought this was going to be great. And I pursued that, took trial practice in law school, advanced trial practice, took trial preparation courses, did all that. But it was going to a arbitration competition at Tulane Law School out of New Orleans, where I had this experience of negotiating baseball contracts in front of managers and owners of teams and agents. And on one side, you either represent the club or the team, or the other side, you represent the player. And that experience really showed me that I could make money at what I loved, which was sports. And so I thought, well, I probably won't be an arbitrator because there's like 1% of people who actually get into this field and actually get chosen as arbitrators. But I thought, this is a field that I could get into, something that I'm passionate about. What I quickly realized was that law school had given me the tools to be able to make my own decisions, or at least unlock something in my mind that was like, oh, I can go build my own practice. I can do my own thing. I don't need approval from folks. I can be an entrepreneur, right? And there's a saying in school where they say the C students become the entrepreneurs, and CEOs, the B students, usually work for corporations and usually get to the C-suite level. And then the A students usually work for the government. That's what the statistics say. And the government, because usually generally government would try to hire, particularly some of the top agencies, will try to hire, obviously the best students, right? But there's something to be said about all that, because I think that as a C student or as a B student, I think sometimes there's this idea that when you're learning something, it's not that you're a bad learner. It's just that as an entrepreneur, you don't want to be told how to learn. You want to experience it, right? This is why you get a lot of entrepreneurs out of folks that maybe don't have the highest grades, right? And so it's interesting. It's just an interesting thing, but I don't have cases in court. And I realized through all those experiences that as much as I love the courtroom for its theatrics, I did a lot of acting when I was a kid. Did a couple plays as a young teenager. I realized that I love the theatrics, but I did not like the combative nature between the parties in the courtroom. And I would rather much be a deal maker and somebody that could put deals together and help out in that regard than to go the other way and to litigate.
So this next question comes from Max. He's curious, how often do you find yourself traveling for work?
It's a good question. I think it depends on the client. If a client's overseas, is in a tournament or something like that, that will happen. But look, I love to travel. I love to see the world. I love experiences. I love learning from experiences. So I travel, frankly, as much as I can, whether it's work related or not. But for the most part, 99% of the time, as a sole practitioner and entrepreneur, travel is pretty much all business related, because you're doing business development, you're traveling around to see your clients. Obviously, you want to make the time for personal, but I travel a lot. I mean, the last 2 years, obviously, this was extended by the fact that I was president of one of the largest bar associations in the country, if not the world, with the California Lawyers Association. But well over 100,000 miles the last couple of years traveled. So it's been a lot. But of course, I like it. I enjoy it, and my sort of lifestyle currently allows for it. And so to me, it sort of makes sense. And in that sort of a way, but it's not always going to be that way for me personally, and it's definitely not that way for a lot of other lawyers. This is just something that I enjoy doing it, and so I've made it a part of my practice.
What was the farthest you had to travel for a client?
London. I went to Wimbledon last year, so yeah, that was probably the furthest so far.
How was it over there?
Amazing, great experience.
This next question comes from Mary. Um, she wants to know, how competitive would you say this industry is, and how do you make it? Yes.
Very competitive. I think I follow the sort of rules of which I tell everybody every time I talk to them is geography, branding, and community. You need to be where the action is happening, both digitally and physically. You need to be creating and establishing your brand and producing content. It's the old adage by a guy named Jonathan Perelman, who was at ICM, which is now owned by CAA, two of the biggest sports entertainment agencies in the world. And he had said that content is king, but distribution is queen, and she wears the pants. And the quote, somewhat funny, but it's also informational, because what it says is that content, of course, is king. You need to create content to have visibility, right? And to create more followers and to have access to information. But where you distribute is also key. So this is why, in many ways, I utilize LinkedIn and also other social media platforms. But LinkedIn is really a great resource because that is, in many ways, my target market, because I'm looking for other professionals to refer. Of course, other forms of social media, same thing, but you're just doing different types of branding and social media. So to me, it was about, again, geography, being the right place, right time, being present both digitally and physically. It's one of the reasons why I run a practice in the Los Angeles area. And then, of course, branding, as I mentioned, and then community is the last piece. Community being looking for organizations that you can join, that you can not just join, but also participate and volunteer and take on leadership. Those three things I think are keys to success. I also think that it's just a matter of time. It's, when I went to law school, and I'll close on this point, I had maybe 400 people who were in, I think it was about 600 people or so that were in my incoming class, maybe even closer to 700. And by the time we graduated, it was a little bit less than that in terms of people who either didn't want to continue with law school or what have you. And, when I first went to a 1L reception for sports entertainment, it was I think the Entertainment Law Society or Sports Law Society on campus. And everybody in the room was like, hey, I want to be the next Jerry Maguire. By the time I graduated, I was the only one in my class pursuing sports law, and the only one in my class pursuing entertainment law from a solo practitioner standpoint. So it goes to tell you that it's time, it's timing, it's waiting it out, it's pushing on, even though there's temptation to quit, right? So I think those would be my keys to success. But the reality of it is that there's no guarantees. I've been doing this almost 12 years now, and it's hard, it's difficult. It's difficult running your own business. It's difficult trying to break into an industry. In many ways, what I did was naive to open a practice, which is very hard, without any prior experience, without any, family ties to it, any mentorships, any financial investment. It was just, I had $0 in my pocket. Frankly, I was negative because, I had all these student loans. So it really took a lot of mentorships, a lot of time, a lot of energy to put into it. But again, there's no guarantee. So in some sense, you have to embrace the uncertainty and learn from it.
Moving on, like these next few questions are actually talking about running your own firm, running your own practice. So this next question comes from Ariella. She asked, what are important steps in maintaining your own firm? Do you still get to work as a lawyer yourself, or do you mainly make sure things are running smoothly?
So, it's just me in the practice. So that's an easy one. It's just me. I don't have an assistant. I don't have another lawyer. Eventually I'd like to grow. I think that'd be nice, but for now it's just me.
Speaking of growing, this question comes from Shani. The real question was, can you hire me? That's what he wrote. I'm gonna kind of switch that up as what do you look for in people that you hire?
It's a good question, and I think I'll change that question to more what I think employers are looking for, right? Because I've never hired anybody, and my practice has always been very humble and very client specific and very client to attorney, direct. And again, maybe that changes in the future, but here would be my advice. If you're looking to get hired, develop relationships, be genuine with people. Don't look for an angle. When you connect with people, it's not about what can this person do for me. It's just be a listener. Take the time to get to know people, care about people. That to me is the key to, I think, to success and just building genuine relationships. Look, when you're genuine, you're going to get hurt, but it's cool to care. It's cool um, to have good relationships and to cherish them and to be a mentor and to be a mentee and to learn from either of those situations. So to me, I think it's genuinely connecting with people and the reason why I started with that is this. If you go to apply for a job on LinkedIn, for example, or whatever other job site is out there, and you don't know somebody at the company, it's very unlikely that you're going to get your resume even looked at, right? So when you apply for a job, think about the connections you have that work at those places. This is why LinkedIn is so important because as opposed to Instagram and Facebook and these other places, you might have an idea of where people work if you've listened and they've told you or they're public about it. But LinkedIn literally filters all that for you. So if somebody's on LinkedIn, it'll say, I work here, I do this, I graduated from this school. And you can use those filters to say, oh, I went to, XYZ undergrad or law school or graduate to school or high school. I'm from a certain hometown. And, you utilize those relationships to say, hey, look, we are similarly situated or we have these things in common. Can you help me out? Can you give me advice? And it's never you always want to add benefit to something, right? So even to this day, I have informational interviews with people. It's never about what I can gain from it. It's about what can I give? How can I serve? And usually out of that, something comes of it. It's a referral, it's a recommendation, something like that. And you'll be surprised when you're genuine with people and you truly care about people, you'll be surprised about where things come from. And, people will refer cases to you, refer clients to you. And it all seems to be very beneficial when you have the right intentions.
It's awesome. And that's a great call, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where it's hard to meet real people. It's very important to like be genuine nowadays. So
Totally. And look, I tell you what, it makes you stand out too, right? Because, when you're genuine and you're in a crowd of maybe folks who are, not genuine, and I wouldn't make, I'm not making that personal assumption about, people being less genuine, but I do think that when you're in and around Hollywood and you're in and around the sports industry and the entertainment industry, there's a tendency or a need sometimes that I think maybe folks want to feel important, they want to feel like they're exceptional or what have you. But to me, it always comes down to the work ethic. It always comes down to the intentions. It always comes down to the relationships. It always comes down to the actions. What are you putting into play? So intentions are important, but it's also about what are you putting into action? What are you putting into the relationships? And I think if you're genuine, look, the reality of it is that it may not work out, right? You may not get everything you're looking for. You may not, but that's okay. It's okay to not succeed and learn from it and grow from it. It's okay to challenge yourself. So that I would sort of end with that.
And speaking of ending, the way the show works is the first question always comes for me, and the last question also always comes for me. And that last question is always, if you were able to give one piece of advice to the people watching at home, what would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. Stay true to your values. I think that, values are important, morals are important, ethics are important. I know a lot of people might say that, but I think actions are important. I think what you put into play, how you treat people is important. Because at the end of the day, everything that you can accumulate, everything that you can gain in this life, you're really leaving behind, right? And really the best thing that you can do is to help train the next generation, and to leave behind some wisdom for folks as they're breaking into this industry. This is why I never turn away a conversation, always willing to answer an email or a phone call or a text, always willing to be helpful. Because I know that in my career, I didn't have a lot of access to resources, particularly early on. And it wasn't until I developed relationships that I began to experience, some help in that regard. So I think it's just about being genuine, connecting with people, and not looking for an angle. I think people need to stop looking for an angle with people. Look for ways to genuinely connect with people.
Keep it real, people. Mr. Evans, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. If you guys like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to follow with the show, keep in contact with what's going on, figure out what's going on with the next guest and things like that. All the socials are going to be down below. If you want to see what's going on with Mr. Evans, I'm going to add his links down below as well. And on that note, this has been Ed in Toronto. This has been Jeremy Evans, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Yeah.